Mac and Mike here. That guy would be Mike. I would be Mac. And I'm telling you, we sat in the kitchen and we talked about 101 topics, and we come up with a great topic for today's video, today's podcast. Unfortunately, by the time we were done talking about 101 topics, we forgot which one we were going to talk about. Do you remember, Mike?
Yeah, there were several. I know something that bites me and makes me a little bit upset is everybody that is too lazy to look up something to see if what they believe is true or what they just posted on social media is true. And that includes my friends on the right. I have friends on the left and friends on the right. And I guess I could be a real pain in the rump to deal with because I come at people with the truth, regardless of which side they're on.
Well, I think you come at people with facts. I wouldn't call it the truth because sometimes our facts turn out to be not so accurate, but they're facts as we know it today.
Well, yeah, our opinions should be based on as much factual information as you can get. Like Occam's razor states, the simplest solution to complex problems is usually the correct one, but that is based on the amount of information you have at hand that's accurate at the time. So, of course, you could talk about current events, and there's some things we just don't know.
That's true.
For example, the whole Minnesota thing, the investigations aren't complete. So I said, unless you've been ever surrounded by a mob before, had to decide whether to pull a trigger or not, or killed someone, you really don't know what you're talking about. And even though I do know what I'm talking about, I won't judge somebody else's circumstance. I wasn't there. I'm not in their head. I didn't have their life experiences. These people just hauled off and killed them. And I said, no. He said, well, they did it without any reason. I never met anyone that ever killed anyone for no reason, even if it was a criminal, unless they're a total psychopath and have no emotions. They don't just go arbitrarily killing people. No, you may kill someone for the wrong reason. You may kill somebody by mistake.
Yeah.
We don't know what was going on. So how about we wait until the investigation's over? I said, and then the person comes back and says, well, the investigations are being run by the people that want to cover it up. So you see, you're never ever going to win these kinds of discussions or debates.
Well, the truth and facts, as you say, are stubborn things. They're very hard to hide facts forever. But Mike, the good woman who tried to hit that ICE agent with the car and the bullet went through the front windshield, there's very little doubt that while we're all sorry that she's deceased, her actions prompted the reaction that caused her death, in my opinion. This Alex Pretty, however you say his name.
Pretty, Pretti.
I'm not so certain that wasn't a mistake. And I'm not blaming any of the ICE agents because I would not want to do any job related to police work or investigative work or crowd control work in any way, shape, or form because it's, as we learned at Kent State in Ohio during the protests of the Vietnam War in the late 60s, mistakes are always possible and not always easy to predict nor easy to stop or rectify. So it's not something that I'll tell you something when you talk about facts and truth, something that our generation, Mike, has it all over today's generation. And that is the lack of technology that we faced versus the abundant technology that people face that have access to today. Whenever I was in school, in grade school and junior high school, when you had to do research of some kind, research was not available at your fingertips. You didn't speak into the speaker on your phone and ask an AI generator, tell me about this. What you did is you went to the public library and there were various resources there, including encyclopedias and other resources that were not necessarily like encyclopedias, but would be books or parts of the library or newspapers where there's information available that might be pertinent to your topic. And what we used to have to do was we didn't plagiarize. Today it's so easy to cut and paste from somebody else's article or some information somewhere and paste it into, and so we couldn't plagiarize. As a matter of fact, not only could we plagiarize, what we had to do is we had to take notes of where we found the information. And we had at the back of our paper, we had to put a footnote. I found this in the Encyclopedia Britannica, edition such and such, page 137 of volume 6, and this is the sentence, this is the paragraph that I was referring to and you better not use what the words they use. You had to change the words around so that it meant the same thing, but they were clearly your words.
But you could plagiarize. You could, and people got caught doing that even in our day.
But the point I'm trying to make, Mike, is that we were forced to do research the old-fashioned way. And we were also forced to be able to justify, approve where we got that information from. So embedded in people of our generation is that understanding of doing the research and finding out whether or not it's factual or not. Because oftentimes we would quote from multiple resources on the same topic that we were writing on or that we were discussing. And today, people have that phone in their hand or they're on their computer and they type a question to this, either a search engine or an AI monitor that, tell me what the value of this is, or tell me how people build the pyramids. And, the AI is checking 147 different references and then, in a few seconds gives you an explanation, both verbal and in writing, as to how people built pyramids. And so what happens in the environment today is people get an answer and they just accept it. Whatever the AI repeats back, they accept it because they don't have that understanding nor that inclination to do the various researches in multiple sources. Now, I know that you and I talked, and when you're doing one of those searches, because that's who you are and how you behave, you're going to get 3 different AI generators to ask the same question to get, and then you're comparing similar or exactly the same with what's not the same. And that way you're able to derive some level of surety about what the truth is and or what the facts are and what they're not.
And then you ask follow-on questions.
Yes.
One of the things I did notice about artificial intelligence answers is humans and AI think different. They're good at research. They're like an advanced Google search. And I said back in the day when we did Google searches, we used to have to read 10 websites. It was 10 per page. And you had to sift through spam and advertisements all over the place to try and arrive at the AI can search much deeper and faster, but it's just researching. You still have to be the governor of the AI and ask follow-on questions. For example, I have the BibleAnswers.net, and because the Bible is so ingrained in my mind from just listening to it over and over and again on tape for years, I'd ask a question, it would give me an answer, and then I have to say, but what about this? You missed this. And it'll actually apologize and say, I did miss that. That's an interesting point. And it'll start to converse with you like a person. So it's not there yet. But for the average, like you see something in the news or your friend posts something on Facebook. And if you can copy the text, I just copy the text, put it in and say true or false, and then paste it in. And it will outline what's true, false, or if it's an exaggeration. And when I see that thing, I'll put it in Gemini, Grok, and ChatGPT, all 3, and see what the answers are. Because some of them come up with some nuances. And that's another thing when we get caught up in all the discussions, especially when they're emotionally charged like religion or politics, we miss the nuances. When I have a friend that I've been talking about with you, when we meet face to face, we're very cordial. When we're all lying, texting back and forth, it's
stilted.
Yeah, it's stilted and not as cordial. So, because we miss the nuance of voice inflection. Sometimes you smile. I have a dry wit, people say. So sometimes you don't know when I'm kidding. So you miss a lot of that. But overall, it's good to have opinions. But when 2 people see a video, they can watch the same video and they come to 2 totally different conclusions. What does that tell you? It tells you that the difference is between the ears. It's not, and remember, when you're seeing a video, it's only a 2D representation and the world is 3D. And if you've ever been overseas or if you're combat vets like Mac and I, it's weird because there's smells and sensations of heat and tension. You can't put yourself in the place of that person you're seeing on video.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going through their mind and you don't know their history. And we're all made differently. We try to create in soldiers and military people a uniform type of behavior. But that's not completely possible. It's something we strive for, but it's not something because we're all different. So I don't judge a lot of things that other people are so quick to judge, one way or the other.
Well, I think the frustration creeps in, Mike, when people accept things that are said to them or answers that are provided to them. You mentioned about 2D video. The old saying in the police world is the worst thing in the world to have is an eyewitness to a crime because the brain plays tricks on you and things that you're absolutely certain you saw are not necessarily things that you really did see.
And people
That
have biases.
that's why video is so important. But I think what gets people in disadvantageous circumstances are that they hear things that people say with such conviction that they go away from that, listening to that as being the truth, as opposed to being an opinion. There's an old saying I like to respond to that and it goes this way. It says, never argue with an idiot. They will drag you down to their level and beat their experience of being an idiot. And that's very often true because I know a lot of these news programs or opinion programs that are dressed up as news programs, what you're getting a left leaning perspective or a right leaning perspective. Very seldom do you get like I'm dating myself, I know. Sergeant Joe Friday used to say on Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. If people got just the facts and they were able to make determinations based on those facts, there would still be disparate, responses from different people because though everyone's based on who they are, what they learned in school, what their parents, who their parents were, how you were treated as a kid, who your friends are. There's so many things that go into making up who you are and how you react or how you think about things. But at least when you're together talking in person, not talking behind the screen, because behind the screen gives you a certain amount of invulnerability too, Mike, right? I mean, no one's going to take a poke at you if you say something, wildly antagonistic when you're behind the screen and they can't touch you. So I think it's not necessarily just the nuances. I think sometimes it's an emboldened set of circumstances because nothing bad is going to happen, regardless of how outrageous your words or comments or accusations might be. And again, you know, and I don't want to beat up on any one person, but I'm going to do this because this is just absolutely something that I can't stand. Have you ever watched MSNBC? And have you ever seen the woman,
Rachel Maddow.
dark-haired woman on night, Rachel Maddow? And Rachel Maddow will look at the camera and she will absolutely say things that I know are false, that are lies. And she probably knows they're lies too. People who you can't unknow the truth once it's known. But she looks at the camera and she says things with such conviction. And I think that people on the other side, on the receiving side of that message on the television screen, believe that as being true. And there are people, I like to say, who can lie to themselves. They lie to themselves to the point that they believe it, and that's when they do stupid things. There was a thing on the internet the other day, and I feel so bad for this woman, but it's come under that heading of, fool around and find out, right? I mean, ICE agents were trying to arrest a pedophile who was in this country illegally. And this woman, along with others, were trying to protest the fact that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents were there at all, let alone they didn't know what they were doing. They just didn't want them there. So one of the agents uncorks a flashbang grenade, and this woman picks it up and tries to throw it back at the ICE agents. And of course, what she chooses to do in that moment, obviously, you have to imagine she was not familiar with the flashbang. She probably thought it was tear gas canister,
Maybe.
something else perhaps. But she picked it up and starts to throw it back, and it explodes and takes off a couple of her fingers. And she literally had a GoFundMe page to get prosthetic fingers, calling herself a hero for trying to oppose the ICE agents. There's so many factors there. Normal, average, everyday Americans do not object when any kind of law enforcement comes to arrest a pedophile. I can't think of a single person in my group of acquaintances, extended group of acquaintances, whether we agree on politics or not, whether we agree on religion or not. It doesn't matter whether we're fierce opponents in so many different areas. I just don't know of anybody. Yet that woman, in her actions, is now missing fingers on her hand because she was there while ICE was arresting a pedophile. Do you understand how incredibly sad and difficult that whole story is to comprehend? Is she willing to say, I got my fingers blown off whenever I was opposing the ICE agents arresting a pedophile? No, she's not going to say that. She's going to say, I was just trying to protect the poor, undocumented citizens who are here trying to earn a living and make life better for their kids. But that's not the truth. Right. But that's her truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't see that story. I'm going to have to look that up, but I'll take your word for it for sure. Sounds like something that would happen. And this is the thing. We could get into it a little bit here on one of the big things I see friends saying is my leftist friends say, now you people on the right are against the Second Amendment because Preddy was armed. I've never said that. Now, what I have said is while you have a perfect right to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean you should. For example, how tall are you? 6'3". I'm 5'10". So there you go. You're a big 5 inches taller than me. Just so you people behind the cameras know that he is. It doesn't look that way. I have a longer torso, so we look similar in height sitting.
When you say similar, now I want people to remember I'm the handsome one and you're the Mike one.
Mike one, yeah, but we look close to the same height.
Yes.
But now I have a freedom of speech. Now, there's nothing I could say to Mac that would ever get him to turn on me or vice versa. But let's say I don't know this guy and he does something and I have a freedom of speech. Am I going to walk up to him and say whatever's on my mind? No. I'm going to think this son of a gun is so big. If I piss him off, he might just clobber me. And I don't want to suffer pain today. The same thing can be true about carrying weapons. You know, I'm big on the Second Amendment. But should you carry at all places at all times, especially if you're going to protest against armed law enforcement? Maybe that's not the best thing to do. And the other thing is, if you watched any of these videos, can you imagine soldiers in a field fighting an enemy and then having people surround behind them, shouting and blowing whistles? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think maybe even though you have a right to protest, that this shouldn't be considered interfering with law enforcement, which is a crime? If it were up to me, things would be much harsher. I would round them all up. I'd be building those camps in the middle of the desert like Sheriff Arpaio and putting them there until their cases could be adjudicated. I'm all for, proper legal things, but if you're going to act like this, you need to be removed from the circumstances and charged with obstruction and given your trial date and kept off of the streets until that trial date arrives.
With all the protections of the Constitution. So you get a speedy trial, you don't have to, incriminate yourself, your right to an attorney, all those things come forward. But
speedy trial is a funny thing, though. I just want to mention when you said that, because I only learned this the other day talking to a criminal. If you waive your hearing, you waive your right to a speedy trial.
Yeah.
That's why people are sitting around waiting years for adjudication.
Yeah. That incident with Alex Pretty and carrying the gun on True Social, President Trump made a post that said, I'm for the Second Amendment, but when people carry weapons, not only carried loaded weapons, but also carried 2 additional magazines when they're going to protest an ICE event. I don't like that. I don't think that they should do that. So someone made that into a meme and they said, hey, all you Second Amendment aficionados that believe in the Second Amendment of the Constitution, do you realize Donald Trump doesn't want you to have weapons, doesn't want you to be able to open carry, doesn't want you to be anywhere near ICE agents with a gun? How do you feel about that? Is that violating your constitutional rights? So another person, someone who's related to my wife, took that meme, took a picture of that and posted again. And of course, that's when I saw it because I'm a friend of this person who's related to my wife. Hey, all you Second Amendment people, Donald Trump doesn't want you to have weapons. Are you going to complain about that? He wants to take away your guns now. Well, that's not what he said. If you go from his original post to what my sister-in-law posted, there's not the same statement there. You understand?
Yeah, this was also videotaped when he was going to a helicopter, and a friend of mine sent this videotape to me with the same thing about the Second Amendment. Because Trump is stating now, you gotta remember, he's going to a helicopter, he's in a hurry, and he's not speaking in complete sentences. It's called an ellipsis when you don't complete a thought. It's inferred that you're talking. He said you can't take a gun to something like this. You can't have a gun. Well, it's not that you can't in the sense that he's against the Second Amendment. It's like you might say to your child, you can't do that. Well, they can do it, but you shouldn't.
Right.
And so people want to take what he says way out of context.
That's my point entirely.
Yes, that's what I mean.
My
it's way
point,
out of context.
my point is that you can't take words and use them in that fashion to make them mean what you want them to mean, which is the same thing that many of these left and right-leaning opinion programs do every night on television.
And others, yeah.
And what disturbs me is there's a lot of people on the internet, and they say things that garner them more eyeballs looking at, more people clicking to share these videos with other people. And what happens is the person who makes the video gets paid for the number of times advertising appears on something that they've published, but that the words and those things that they say can have a detrimental effect on someone else, depending on what frame of mind they're in, how strong of a person they are. I mean, not only physically, but mentally. In weak moments, people hear certain messages and they act on them. And it may be something they wouldn't ordinarily do. But when people make statements like that, that's where the danger creeps into these. I'm not responsible. I have free speech. There was a story here recently where a young high school boy committed suicide. And he committed suicide because he had fallen into some, I think it was 678 or something like that, a website that gets these kids interested and then talks about suicide and self-harm and everything. And they literally convinced this kid to take his own life. And, the guy that originally created this was from Texas, and he turned out to be a pedophile. He's in jail right now. But other people have hopped onto this. And again, you would hope that most people are mentally strong enough and they're self-assured and they're capable of listening to a message and filtering it either through their intelligence or through their religious beliefs or through some other filter that enables them to say, this is not right, this is wrong, or I shouldn't do this. And there are some people that don't get to the point where I shouldn't do this. And I think that's, when you look at the guy that shot the president, we'll never know because he was killed. But you look at the guy that killed Charlie Kirk, he had received messages not from Charlie Kirk necessarily, but from people like Charlie Kirk, and including some of the things Charlie Kirk had said, which he took as personal individual affronts, attacks on him and his lifestyle. So he decided to do something about it. And where does that line of free speech, in my words, in the faith that I believe, that's a sin, but in other people's words, they would say, you're a bad person because you're doing this. Or some people take it even farther. You can't do this, but these people are just living their lives, and they're so that I'm going to use the word oppression, but I don't mean it in the typical sense of oppression. They take that as such a critical factor against their lifestyle that they want to lunge out and they want to attack somebody for the criticism that's coming their way. And I use lesbian and homosexual, but I don't mean that just group. There's all kinds of ways people get criticized for things that they just naturally do. I learned a long time ago that many of us do things just by nature or just by, frequency that we do it before, we've done it before, we do it again. And yet those simple things that we do antagonize other people. And oftentimes we're not even aware of it.
Right.
And that can cause significant problems, especially when it's not face to face and you don't get that that warm and fuzzy smile and that pat on the back and the dry wit kind
Or
of
the
thing.
sly grin that
Yep.
lets you know that somebody's just digging on you a little
Right.
bit and doesn't
Right.
mean it so harshly.
When you're separated by screen, that can be a problem, and it can also be a problem that left undebated can fester and become a significant problem for individuals. I mentioned to you earlier that from the young age, my mom encouraged my brother and I to have debates around the dining room table, around the kitchen table. And there would be subjects, and there were no subjects off limits around my kitchen table. You can discuss politics and sex and war and all these things. And it was a refreshing way of getting things out in the open, not only to identify your perceived perspective, but also get someone else's perspective and maybe learn a little bit, maybe modify your perspective based on new information. And as we were talking before, you, I think, agreed with me. We don't have debate anymore in our society,
Not much, no.
and that can be a significant problem, and it can lead to many. And if you're talking to somebody, especially somebody that you're on friendly terms with, like you mentioned with your friend, who says he's no longer a Republican, he's an orphan from a political party perspective. If he feels that way, imagine being there and nothing I say or do makes a difference. What would that do to your ego and to your self-esteem? I mean, if he truly believes that he's an orphan and that there's no political party representing him, what does that leave him? I don't know the man, so
I
I'm
used to fear
inappropriate.
that. I did fear that at one point, but no, he never struck me. But I've had friends that have killed themselves, and the one guy you never ever would have suspected him. I mean, he was just as happy-go-lucky as the
Yeah.
day was long,
Yes.
and boom, he's gone. Others, you can kind of see it coming. Well, he's afraid I might out him, so I'm not even going to mention what he used to do.
Yeah.
But it's funny. He likes to say things to me personally by messenger. He won't come on video, and we could give him anonymity through Zoom. But I don't know what his reasons for not like. I like to debate. I like to discuss, and I will, as you know. You've seen me in action. I'll listen to your point of view and try and find some kind of compromise. I'm more apt to do that in person than I am in writing in text messages. Even I get guilty of that, because time's short. You can say a lot more with a few words. Like you texting your kids ever? I don't know about you, but I text my kids and I say, "Hey, let's talk on the phone because this back and forth text is just we can say in 2 minutes what's going to take us a half an hour to say by text." So, because communication is a lot of nonverbal communication.
I had a circumstance, a guy that I knew at work who was friends with everybody. And the guy was wicked smart. As they say in Boston, wicked smart. We had this rather large network for a very large customer of ours. And as the technology changed, we no longer had to build networks in. What this guy did is he helped build the network. So every piece of the network, he had what I'll say that photographic memory of. He knew where everything was, and he knew how to fix anything, and he knew where the weak points were. Well, as the technology changed, the knowledge that he had and the building of the network in the old fashioned way that it was built was not necessary. Eventually, with downsizing and all the things many of us went through in these large corporations, he lost his job. And as he lost his, he went from being the man, the most important man. If you had a question about this large network, you went to him and he knew it. He knew the answer. So he was vital in the organization as it relates to that large customer and that specific network. Well, when the technology changed and we could provide the same networking capabilities without all the different piece parts and all the awkward kind of ways we used to build networks, it was much easier, much slicker, much more powerful network. And then, of course, he got laid off. We another downsizing, and I'm sorry, we don't need your expertise anymore. So he was in his early 50s, and he had a lot of money. I mean, he worked for the company for a long time, and he had a very nice nest egg. But this is my opinion. I don't know this to be sure. Without having that job, without being the man for the network, he no longer felt important. And he didn't go home and use a gun. He went home one night, and when his family was gone, and he wrapped a plastic bag around himself, he suffocated himself that way. And everyone was shocked because there was no indication whatsoever that this guy was going through any kind of hard times. So that I guess a caution to anybody that watches this, be aware of certain kinds of major life changes can cause someone to have dark thoughts.
Yeah, and you're hitting on something that I've often said about veterans who commit suicide, which was one of the things you and I had worked on together. You liked my saying, I guess, that everybody needs a sense of meaning, direction, and purpose in life.
Yes.
I string those three things together just because I think it's kind of lilty, But we all do need some sense of purpose. And I also see that a lot of people, let's say the protesters in Minnesota, and I hate to say this, but the people on the extreme left and right are, I think, lacking an identity of sorts. And they're seeking some kind of purpose, something that they can grab onto that makes them emotionally feel like they're invested. Whether it's the left or the right, doesn't really matter. I remember leaving the Air Force. I was 23 years active duty. And, that was gratifying I was the guy that everybody came to for answers. And then eventually that changed and they built a new program and all that. So, I lost some of my significance. But yeah, I've never been bothered by that because I had a good grounding in the first place. Like I didn't think that was my only identity. So, but there are a lot of people that lose their sense of identity. Your children grow up, they leave the home. You're so accustomed to being mom and dad, and all of a sudden it's like you're not needed anymore or not needed as much. They still come to us for what, Mac? Money and help, right? Most of the time, not all. But anyway, one of them's going to be able to help me with money. That's what I like.
I'm wrapped up in taking care of my 98-year-old father with dementia.
Yes.
And my children observed me taking care of my dad. And that has caused a couple of my children to say, Dad, someday we're going to be taking care of you. And I don't know if it's the lesson that I'm teaching them of my sacrifice for my father, or whether it's the demonstration of love and caring that goes along with that. But actually seeing that happen kind of puts them in the mind frame of, well, I'm going to do that for my dad as well. I hope that's true. But you mentioned veteran suicide, and one of the things I think is true about veteran suicide, Mike, is when you're in the military, you're part of a unit, and that unit has a mission. And it doesn't matter how big the unit is, if you're talking from a platoon to a company to a battalion or larger, or however they call them in the Air Force. For the most part, they all have a common goal, common situation that they're trying to make happen or defend from happening. And because of that, there's a whole lot of camaraderie. There's a feeling of working together for that common goal. And then as soon as somebody leaves the military and they go into the civilian workforce, that same sense of everybody working towards a common goal dissipates. Because even if you're all working on the same, there's only so many raises that can go around. So you're always in competition for that. There's a lot of gossiping that happens. Did you see what John did? Did you see what Mary did? It's trying to get a leg up on someone else for the next nice thing that comes along. And we don't have that in the military because promotions were generally centralized, and you could move all over the place. But I think that has something to do with that individual's self-worth. In the civilian world, what are you evaluated by as far as your worth? It's how much you get paid, what kind of perks you get from the company, that kind of stuff. Where in the military, most of that was not a factor. And again, working in the same goal versus almost working opposite of one another in the civilian world so you can get a little bit more than the next person. And I think in a way, Mike, that really comes down to what we're talking about with people they grasp onto a certain perspective and they're unwilling to let it go. Your friend who says I'm an orphan, I don't belong to either the Republican or the thing that says to me is when he uses that term, I'm an orphan. I don't have anywhere to be. I don't have anybody with me, and I'm by myself. You've heard the old saying, "No man is an island."
Yeah.
There's all kinds of negative thoughts that can creep into someone's psyche, into somebody's world when they think they're the orphan. And just like my friend who suffocated himself, he was once a important key member of the team. And when he was laid off and no longer had a job, there's he was smart enough. He could have got a job in lots of different places. but he was the provider for his family. He no longer felt like he had worth. And I think all of us need to be cognizant of the fact that we can't allow that to happen to people we know.
So yeah, one of the other things that can happen when you feel like a political orphan or something is you can get this sense of superiority to everybody else. My friend and I had my other friend, Stan. I don't know if you ever met Stan.
Yeah.
We had discussions about something that my other friend brought up to me recently, which is because he says he's a political orphan. And he talked about the challenges that we face as a country with basically two political parties, which is correct. But the only other systems are like Germany and Israel, where they have these coalition government that they have to put together.
Yep.
And it doesn't really matter if it's a two-party system or coalition. All governance has its issues, because I understand what my friend says half the time. There's things I agree with him on. I mean, for goodness sakes, I agree with AOC and Bernie Sanders on certain things. Now, before everybody gets their panties in a bunch, what I mean is Bernie Sanders and AOC have understood problems. I mean, obviously they're talking about the cost of living. Well, we all agree it's difficult, it's high.
And they both say college is too expensive.
College, and they're definitely
college loans are
and,
horrendous.
And healthcare is an issue.
Yep.
And there's no doubt that we agree. The difference is how we solve it. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of great middle of the road solutions. You can either have socialized or independent or some kind of blend of the two. But no matter what country we look at that's tried the various things, there's still horrific issues everywhere. So some problems are insurmountable. And it's funny the way we judge other people in these big groups. When we sit down and talk to people one-on-one, we find out, we just disagree on how to solve things.
Donald Trump came out recently, and I know we talked about this before, but he said America needs Greenland. We're going to buy Greenland. We have to. It's national security for all of NATO. And many of the countries in NATO said, you can't have it. We're not going to do that. Greenland gets to have a say, and Denmark gets to have a say. I think they're working towards a goal where they're taking part of a treaty that was formed in 1951 after World War II that gave America certain access to build certain military bases on the island and some other. And what they're going to do is USA is probably going to end up with part of Greenland, part of it that's not being used at all right now. It's probably going to end up as being military bases that are literally declared sovereign territory of the United States.
Yes.
So it's a compromise that's available when people are willing to look at each other and talk to one another. If they can come to those kinds of negotiated settlements at such a high level, why can't we do it on an individual level? It seems to me it would be a whole lot easier with two people talking to one another, right?
Yeah, and even I kind of thought it was the Greenland thing, of course, struck me as odd early on. I won't deny that. I didn't understand what he was thinking completely. Then he started talking about the Golden Dome. And, you heard people on both sides of the issue, and it didn't seem to matter if you're Republican or Democrat. People were split on
Yes, they were
on the subject. And then the Secretary General of NATO comes down on Donald Trump's side, essentially.
Yes. So did the president of Poland.
Yeah.
And to a lesser extent, the prime minister of Finland. Donald Trump is not wrong. And, what the president of Poland said just blatantly, he said, look, we weren't paying our 2%. Now it's up to 5%, and we're closer to that. Right. He said, but America's been paying for our defense for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
He said, don't get me wrong. He said, I love the Polish troops. And he said, as far as Polish troops defending Poland, we're capable of doing that, and we will do a fine job. And if Russia comes knocking on our door, we will defend ourselves, and we're capable of doing that. He said, but what stops Russia from coming to knocking on our door is the United States of America. So, he was very complimentary of Trump and the U.S., and I think that really startled a lot of people in the European Union and NATO.
Yeah, it does. And, it's very easy to come against an idea until we get into the whole cross-examining of whatever's gone on there with my Zoom. I don't know, looking at things from all sides and getting a lot of input. Anyway.
Well, we live in a world that's changing every moment, Mike. I think what's going on in Canada today with people forget that Quebec tried to secede from Canada back in 95 and came within like a point or 100%. Something like that of succeeding. And now Alberta wants to secede from the Canadian Union. And if Alberta is successful, you can bet that there are other provinces that are going to follow the same road to arrive at a similar, it's just so egregious with Alberta, the amount of money they pay into the government system, the shared government system. And they have this idea of equalization of the various provinces. And Alberta is getting zero equalization payments from while they're doing some ungodly number of millions of dollars that they're sharing with others. And that only goes so long until people say, hey, wait a minute, we're not getting anything in return for what we're given. We're tired of this. And I think what Prime Minister Carney, or as Donald Trump refers to him, as President Trump refers to him as Governor Carney, as he found out, some of the I have to admit, when I heard him speak, I understood exactly what he's saying is Canada is a sovereign nation, and we won't be dictated to by our big brother to the south. That's not fair for you to tell us how things are going to be. We're supposed to be negotiating for a very strong position. And you may not like that. As the prime minister, you have to understand the reality. Weren't we talking about that before, about the idealism versus the realism of certain parts of the world today? And you can want it to be idealistic all you want. You can pray for it to be idealistic. You can hope and desire it, but you can't change the truth. You can't change reality. It is real. So, anyways, I guess we beat this. I'm not even sure what we started talking about anymore, Mike. But whatever it was that we were talking about, I think we beat it up enough.
Yeah. All righty.
Mac and Mike
Out.
out.